everybody, and holy cow, welcome from a snowy Denver. I am firmly ensconced in the northern command post, and we have officially somewhere in the vicinity of 20 inches of snow just outside our back door, and the dog just looked at it and said, nope, I ain't going out there. So shovel me away to do my business, and then we'll get off on the right foot. So earlier this morning I was out and I blew off my driveway, all 6 inches or so of it, and it's all gone. It's all filled back in. So I have a great fun task ahead of me tomorrow. Needless to say, we are in the middle of a huge, massive snowstorm here. It's in Denver. And I will be enjoying a day off tomorrow, a snow day, which always gets a little interesting, right? Because, I mean, we've been doing remote for so long. That would be a real party crasher to go back to remote just for a snow day rather than getting to actually enjoy it. So for what it's worth, welcome to the Psych Monologues. I am Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host. And the Psych Monologues is a podcast exploring the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. We are in the middle of a series looking at race in the church and racial reconciliation. And what I have for you is a continuing on of a conversation I had with a good friend of mine by the name of Mr. Michael Spottsville. He is the lead pastor at Meadowwood Church in Aurora, Colorado, a multi-ethnic church. And he and I go back a fair amount of distance. When I first came to Colorado, I was hired on with a men's organization called Promise Keepers, and I was to be a part of the racial reconciliation department, and I was part of a team, and Michael was part of that team, as well as some other guys that came to be some really good friends of mine, Michael being the foremost of that. So what we launched into last week on the 7th was a conversation about race in the church and what goes on there in his perspective. And he brings a unique perspective because he has been around and in the conversations with the Christians and how oftentimes we see that Sunday is our most segregated hour of the week. And so we have an honest conversation, and that's what you actually get to listen in on as we talk around a variety of topics. And we finished with a example, and Michael has a lot of them in interactions with a variety of pastors, white pastors particularly. And I think there's something to be learned in terms of hearing it from his perspective and gaining some measure of sensitivity and balance within all of that, and an ability to listen with ears that are not informed by an agenda as much as informed by the passion to know another believer in Christ. And so Michael has been a good friend, and he was kind enough to offer up an hour's worth of his time to come in and have a conversation with me about race in the church. And also that will continue today in today's podcast, and then also probably next week's. We recorded enough conversation that it will extend probably into next week, so that you can hear the full landscape of the conversation that he and I had around this issue of race in the church. So without further ado, we will join the conversation in progress, and then at the end of 25 minutes or so, I will come back with the usual kind of end of program reminders for folks, and then we'll call it a day, and we'll move on to next week. So thanks so much for joining me. I pray that this time will be enlightening and encouraging to you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Well, it's good to have you, Michael. It really is. It's been way too long. I think the last time we sat was on the porch of Starbucks down at Denver.
Yeah, REI, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
When we could actually do that in the old days.
Yep.
But I thought about in terms of doing this conversation is I'm thinking, well, this is kind of a recreation of some of the conversations we had at Promise Keepers, and you and Ed and I sitting in the office and dreaming and thinking about all the things that resources PK could come up with and all that. But I guess, this thought has gone through my head for a while since the George Floyd thing blew up in the summer, and I was thinking I need to sit down with Michael and hear his thoughts about some of that.
Yeah.
So. Maybe the easiest place to start would be then and now. The kinds of conversations we were having at Promise Keepers about racial reconciliation and Sunday being the most segregated day, et cetera, et cetera. And then where are we now? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as far as that comparison. What would you say?
When you say where are we now, are you talking about the church, the culture?
Yeah, let's start with the culture, and then we'll zoom in on the church.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, if you want to go back to 2014 when Michael Brown was killed and fast forward up to now, and you take a look at everything that's going on recently, you'd have to say the nation is more polarized now than it's ever been racially.
Yep.
Then there's been the emergence of Black Lives Matter, probably, say, 2014. And that movement has gained momentum. And I think overall it's going to be injurious to the black community if that movement continues to gain momentum. It's anti-family. It's anti-male. It has some serious Marxist leanings. And, if you look at the African American community now, 77% of children born in a family right now are born in one-parent families.
Right.
So if you destroy the family unit under the premise that is going to be raised by a village, what is that going to look like?
Yeah. What kind of village is there?
Yeah. So I think that's a problem. I think when you look at the church, I don't think the church has made any significant progress in the matter of racial reconciliation. And I think it's a spiritual problem. Racism in itself is a spiritual problem. You're hating somebody that's made in the image of God.
Completely.
That's a problem.
Yep.
That's a spiritual problem.
Yep.
I think Sunday is still the most segregated hour or two, in America. And it's a real joy to be in a multiracial, congregation. I'm a pastor of a multiracial congregation.
Yeah.
When you look at it from a white to other split, it's probably 70-30. But we've been able to work through our issues over time, not without some challenges at times, But I think if you're going to have true reconciliation, you're going to have challenges. It's messy. You got issues that you got to work through. And there has to be some give and take in order for it to be successful. And people have to spend more time understanding the other person than they're trying to hold ground on the things that they think are most important.
Yeah.
Because what's important to you might not be important to the other person. And somewhere in the whole reconciliative process, you got to come around some principles that represent common ground so that you can go forward.
So you've been at Meadowwood for how long?
Almost 12 years now.
So, and the one I did pulpit fill for wasn't Meadowwood, was it?
I think you might have been at Light and Life, which is now River Church, which is right down the street from here.
Oh, right. Oh, no. It was Aurora, wasn't it?
You were in Aurora?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that still it?
Meadowwood?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Okay. That must have been before I got there then.
You might have been. In our interactions, you've filled in for people down close here to Watts and Alameda. You filled in there,
right?
And I remember talking there, and then I think it was at Meadowwood that you invited me to come and talk, and that's how I made the connection with Joseph.
That's right. I'm sorry.
No,
that's true. That's been a few years ago. Yeah,
just a few.
Yeah,
just a few.
Right.
But I guess I wonder, even as that congregation, the one you're leading, has matured. I mean, what kinds of issues, when you say we have to come together and kind of work these things out and have some conversation, I mean, what are the main ones that you had to fight your way through or wrestle with in a multiracial church like that?
Well, I'll put it this way. I think one of the first things that we had to establish was that we were just going to preach the word of God consistently, and we were going to do the best we could to live by the word and to take care of each other in the process.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you're looking beyond, white and black. You're kind of nestled into Galatians 3:28, and then you just you move on from there.
Right.
I think when I first got there, I'm sure there were a few people who were like, okay, well, there goes the neighborhood sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
What I mean? And I had one guy, for instance, who came up to me like the second or third Sunday I was there. And these two African-American guys, he was living in Montbello at the time. These two African-American guys got into a dispute with each other, and they were across the street. One guy was standing in front of his house, and the other guy was across the street.
Oh, okay? Wow. Okay.
And the guy across the street from his house starts shooting at the other guy. And, bullet holes in the guy's house, and he wasn't there. He was working, and his wife was, laying somewhere on the floor trying to avoid the bullets. And he took pictures of it, and he had it on his laptop, and he brought it to me, before service. What do you think about this? He goes, I'm not sure. What do where are we going with this conversation? And fast forward 11 or 12 years later, he and I call each other every Wednesday. We've been working through the scriptures. I would say for the last 7-8 years. So we've come a long way from, that conversation.
Yeah.
Now, there have been other people who I've had sidebar conversations about various and sundry things who didn't quite see things the way that I did, but over time we've been able to prayerfully work through those issues.
Yeah.
We've never had to have a quote unquote reconciliation meeting or anything like that. I think one of the reasons why we've been able to work through issues is because the leadership team at the church has been very supportive of this whole matter of just sticking with the word.
Yep.
Trying to praying through stuff as we go along, that's meant a lot. I mean, a pastor who is trying to drive a reconciliation process all by himself is going to get worn down.
Yep.
You got to have more than just the pastor. You got to have the leader, the leadership team supportive
right.
of what's going on. And they have to understand what's going on so that they can be the people who are talking to the members, the rest of the members of the congregation, to help them understand what we're doing.
Right, right.
You know, I think the other thing, transparency is really the key to this. You know, if there's something going on in your heart, or there's something going on in the body that needs to be dealt with, then let's get it out on the table.
Yep.
You know, what's the problem? How can we how can we deal with this situation?
Yeah, the reality is reconciliation happens with two. I mean, there's a lot of other, like you said, kind of internal work that individuals have to do, but that sets their hearts in place to come to the table and talk about us rather than me or you, kind of thing.
Right.
Back in literally 20 years ago, I mean, it's been that long. We were battling with a lot of pastors. I still remember, a meeting that we were at in Memphis with the African American pastors there, and some of the real significant fears, of the message that Riley and Coach Mack had about reconciliation. And you said, the church hasn't moved that much. Is that fear still very present, or made worse, or how would you gauge that?
When I go back to, that's been almost 25 years ago now.
Yeah, you predate me with Promise Keepers.
Yeah. First of all, I think there was a struggle within Promise Keepers about what is reconciliation.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think, let's say early 90s, there was a form of reconciliation that I think the ministry had embraced. And then there was probably in, 95, 96, when Raleigh came along, there was the Raleigh, Washington, what was the other guy that he worked with?
Glenn K. Ryan.
The K. Ryan Washington reconciliation.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and so there was this, back and forth. And then finally, I think the Washington K. Ryan racial reconciliation prevailed. However, I don't think that their brand of reconciliation was known nationally.
Right.
Okay. Specifically in the African American community.
Yep.
I didn't perceive that a lot of guys knew or heard of him or of this, reconciliation, and so there was some resistance. And I mean, I grew up in the African American church. I mean, I as a kid, and the African American church and what it stands for is a whole lot different than, say, what the white church stands for. Okay, the African American church is everything to an African American. Okay, you learn your history there. You become a leader there. There's just a lot of things that are a part of the African American church. Your community activism,
it's a centerpiece.
It's everything. I mean, your rappers come from the African American church.
Right.
Your R&B singers come from the American church. Your politicians come from the African American church. Okay, and so when you say reconciliation, it's like, what? What does that mean? Does that mean we have to give up some of the stuff that we're doing now? Do we have to become,
Right.
There's a whole lot of stuff that you got to work through before you start talking about how we're going to come together. Because if coming together means that I lose some of the stuff that I've been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years, then I'm not too crazy about that idea.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if coming together means that you give up some of your stuff and I might give up some of my stuff so that we have a better basis for getting along, that's fine. But let's identify what that is.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. The way that you described it, I'm sure that we've had this conversation before, but I've forgotten it, is how much of woven in the church is in the African American community versus in the white community. It's like something you do.
Right.
Rather than being woven into the fabric of everything that every person does, really, within the backdrop. So it makes sense that when we have people banging the table about reconciliation, the first thought, and I want to make sure I'm squaring this with you, African Americans end up hearing it as, I've got to give something up. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how they see white people's attempt at that. Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah. Boy, that's a really deep question. Let me look at it from a historical perspective. Sure. Okay, if you say the African American church, mm-hmm. the African American church has been at the point of everything. Mm-hmm. If you go back to the 50s when Rosa Parks rode the bus and Martin Luther King was incited by that to begin the whole civil rights movement, and he carried the ball for that for a long period of time. The white church was not interested in in the plight of improving the life of black people in America. Mm-hmm. They just weren't interested. Mm-hmm. At least they didn't seem interested.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Now all of a sudden you're interested. Why?
Yeah. What's the change?
Yeah, and what does that mean for us?
Right.
So I think that's the dynamic that I've seen, and it still exists. Mm-hmm. I think that the African American church may not be as prominent in the total life of the African American in America as it was before, but it's still a major force.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So from a historical point of view, then, I mean, the misunderstanding, if you will, or even the suspiciousness is seeing whites all of a sudden kind of come to Jesus about this reconciliation thing, and what are they looking for rather than what are they attempting to do?
Well, whites always want to come. They always want to do it on their terms. Mm-hmm. At least this is the perspective of a 70-year-old African American. Okay,
right.
So I can remember just one incident. I was a pastor in North Carolina, pastor of a 100% African American church, and this white church across town had what they call Humanitarian Sunday. So they invited me to preach and my church to come along for for the Sunday. So I'm in the pastor's office with him, and he goes, "First of all, let me tell you something. You only got 16 minutes to preach in the first service, and 20 in the other one, because that's all the time they give us. I know you guys preach longer than that." So already, this guy had already put me in the box, and the box was getting smaller all the time.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? You asked me to come over there and fellowship with you and preach, and now you're trying to tell me how long I can preach. Mm-hmm. The only thing he didn't tell me to do was what to preach. You know what I mean? And I think that's the dynamic that bristles, the African American church, the African American pastor. Mm-hmm. I'll give you another example. When I won't name the denomination, but it was a primarily African American denomination, and we went there with our men's ministry stuff, and they're like, "We don't want that stuff, okay? Because you don't understand us." And then, so that means that your stuff is not going to be stuff that we can weave into the fabric of what we do here, because our people are going to look at it, our men are going to look at it and say, "What is this stuff?" Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So,
yeah. Well, I mean, wax eloquent for me for a minute philosophically. I mean, what what do you think is the key issues? I know, I think I'm pretty sure, having our friendship as long as we've had, that we both agree that it starts with the heart, not necessarily a social movement. And so, and also getting anchored in God's word as far as our humility before God then translates into our relationship with other people. But what key issues do you feel like need to be the focal point, maybe of teaching, maybe of conversations that aren't happening now that would help that process along?
I think you have to start at ground zero. Okay, ground zero is the cross. We bring all our issues to the cross. Okay, and then we begin to talk through what the issues are. I think in the African American community as a whole, the biggest challenge that African Americans always have and continue to have is access. Okay, and you can see it in this whole COVID situation. Okay. We're the ones who are suffering most in this pandemic because we don't have access to good health care.
Yep.
And now you're talking about registering for a vaccine. You got to register the vaccine online. Well, there's a deficit there because the infrastructure in the community is not what it should be. I mean, Congress is already approving billions of dollars to do 5G and all this other stuff to, bring the community up to the same level of communication bandwidth, if you will, that exists in suburbia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So I think access is one. I think that's a big one. I think there needs to be some discussion about this whole matter of education. Okay. Again, and a friend of mine, he works with Howard University, and he's been doing a lot of work over there. A boy, an African American boy who can't read by the third grade has a huge chance of being in prison by the time he's 16, 17, or 18 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. So elementary school is really the thoroughfare to jail or to prison. Okay. So access, education, and then I think also there needs to be some discussion about, the avenues for employment once a person gets a decent, education. Yeah. So those are the things that I think continue to be the issues. And I would say that the white church has had a lot of opportunities to weigh into these kind of things, to exert their influence, because a lot of these CEOs and important business people that man up all these corporations, not all of them are believers,
right?
But I'm saying those that are could have and should have, exerted their influence in a way that would have made it a lot easier for African Americans, but just people of color in general, to have the access, the education, and the employment opportunities that would make for a stronger community, a more viable community. But those kind of things just don't seem to be happening.
Well, thanks for joining me for another edition of Race in the Church with Talk Much? For the Psych Monologues and my friend Michael Spottsville. We will be gathering Q&A. I had originally thought I would put a Q&A on the website if people wanted to ask some questions that spring from the conversation he and I had. It didn't really work out real well. I ended up with a lot of Russian spam. So I think the way we're going to run this is that you can always put it on your questions on the Instagram site and submit a question that way. and then we will sift them through. And if we have enough, then I'll bring Michael back, and he and I will have a conversation and try to answer some of these questions from both perspectives. And I think that probably would lead to even a bigger conversation, or a healthier conversation, let's put it that way, on that. So we're going to move it to the Instagram site. It's at the Psych Monologues on Instagram. You can pose a question there if you have them. So that's with the Q&A, okay? The other thing is, just as a reminder, subscriptions, and to follow us either on the website at drmitch.com, upper right-hand corner, there's a place to subscribe. So if there's any new information or new material that is posted on the website, you will be the first to know about it and be able to follow it. Also on Instagram, I already mentioned, at the Psych Monologues. Facebook is ray.mitch, and LinkedIn is drmitch. And you can follow us on any of those platforms, whichever is preferable to you. Also, we can be pretty much found wherever podcasts are published, and so we are on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean. I don't know how many people listen to Podbean, but that's where the podcast is actually hosted. Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio, all of the basic platforms that you can find to find a podcast. And if you like it, I would encourage you to say so. That would always increase our profile. It would always be helpful, folks, for us to be able to gain a bigger following for the next item, and that is that the Psych Monologues are not only an opportunity for me to comment and maybe occasionally rant about issues related to spiritual formation and faith and psychology, but also just a way for us to continue to grow our scholarship fund for students from CCU, and maybe if we get a big enough account or fund, we can have other students from other universities come. I'd be very open to that idea. But all of your contributions are tax-deductible gifts for the CCU Silent Retreat. So partner with us. We have another one coming up in April 8th through the 11th. And that would be a huge blessing and a huge sense of gratitude that I would feel to be able to have those have some support in that regard. If you would like to contribute through check, you can by all means do that. You just simply make your checks out to 1615.tv, 1615.tv, and the address would be P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado 80104. So there are a variety of means to support and encourage some students to engage in the disciplines, spiritual disciplines of silence and solitude. It is a unique experience for students or anyone really to share in, and it's an opportunity really to have God teach to us in the deepest parts of our heart. So there are the end of program reminders. That's all I have for you tonight. If you're in the Denver area, I pray you're safe, warm, and with electricity, which makes this podcast possible. And as always, just a reminder, love ya. Later. Bye.